Okay. All righty, welcome today. I'm Colonel Denny Peoples. I'm the Senior Aerospace Science Instructor at AZ 2006-3 in Prescott, Arizona. We're lucky to have a retired Brigadier General Robert Etter from the Army Air Corps and the United States Air Force, Air National Guard too, to talk to us about his career and his experience here through the Air Force and his development, his different planes he's flown, and he'll be fielding questions from you. So everybody please welcome General Etter.
I guess you know that I'm the lucky one here. When I see all these bright and shiny faces, I feel inspired. It's really nice to be here with you. I was born in a shack down in north central Arkansas in 1920. If you think about that, that's a fur piece back. So I did not have the opportunity to learn as you folks do today. I call that destiny. The time that you folks were born is destiny. You didn't have much to do with it. But you do have something to do with what happens from the day on in the rest of your life. And if you can remember those 2 points, we've spent time here today worthwhile. We traveled, for some reason, my folks decided to travel from Arkansas to Colorado. And we traveled in a covered wagon. Primarily we walked, and I was pretty young, and I rode in the wagon with a couple of the ladies, my grandmother maybe. But at any rate, it took us 3 years to go from Arkansas to Colorado, maybe a fourth of the way across the country.
Wow. What do you remember from that?
Well, I remember that I fell out of the wagon and I hit my head on the DoubleTree pin. If you don't know what a DoubleTree pin is, look it up. But and naturally in those days we didn't have a lot of antibiotics, so it got infected, and I got a scar that's about that yay big still right here at the front of my head. But it finally healed up, and I managed to make it through. But that is just one area. Just think of the advances in medicine that have been made in my lifetime. As Colonel Peoples talked to you, it won't be uncommon for people to live to be 100 in your lifetime. That's because of scientific advancements. And the nice part of it is that you folks are going to have a hand in it, and you're going to cause some of it to happen. And that's a really intriguing thought. It's not something that, you know, you buy at the store in a paper bag. It comes from the intelligence and the effort of the people sitting in this room. And that's the real message that I would like to leave with you folks here today. I mentioned earlier, have any of you folks ever here had a summer job? Could I see a hand if you? Okay. When whomever you talked to about getting the job, and they told you where to report and what day to report and what time to report. And I hope that when you reported, you were at least 20 minutes early. If you weren't, you missed an opportunity. That's the way life is. It's kind of what you make it. And that didn't mean you had to be Superman, but use the abilities that you have to accomplish your objectives. Your objectives will be many. Some of you may be a railroad engineer. Be the best railroad engineer you can be. Or you may be a scientist that discovers a cure for cancer. That's pretty good too. But whatever you decide to be, to a great degree, I would say 90-some degrees, 90% of it will be the result of your brain power and your effort. And effort goes a long way. Your brain isn't much if you don't use it. So I may be overemphasizing that, but that's tough to do. I believe that everyone ends up kind of where they want to be. Okay, I told you that it took us 3 years to go from north central Arkansas to Colorado Springs. And after becoming an adult, and I was flying an F-100, I went from Little Rock Air Force Base up to Stapleton at Colorado Springs in 45 minutes. I used a little burner, I must admit, but on the other hand, when you think of in one lifetime, that is a major accomplishment. And of course, in my lifetime, we put a man on the moon. The computer that flew the LIM on the moon landing had something like 1,700 memory. And one of these things that most of you have, I have no idea how much, but there's a lot more than 1,700 in there in one lifetime. So each of you can expect really exciting things.
And why don't you tell them about your memory of when they walked on the moon? Where were you there, and what do you remember about that?
I was with, in 1969, I was with other military people, but it was in where I was, it was nighttime. It was about 9 o'clock at night after dark. And whenever I heard Neil Armstrong with his famous quote, I thought we have really came a long way in my lifetime. And it's kind of hard to grasp all of that in one session. But as time goes on, with effort, resources, that you will see, it will just be amazing what you're going to encounter. And the ability to move people on the earth. And even normally Columbus with his sailboats, he finally got across an ocean. But the SR-71, I know of 2 times when it flew from Morón, Spain to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington in 2.5 hours. Now that's quite an advancement. And the SR-71 was a supersonic airplane. It's been retired now, but the people that flew that, they could not fly it by hand because it was so fast and so sensitive that they had to fly the computer that flew the airplane. These are things that I've seen in my lifetime. And I can't even guess what you folks are going to see. I graduated from high school when I was almost 20 years old. And that was right in 1940. And of course, World War II was started. And after that, I tried to go down and enlist in the Army Air Corps, but I didn't have enough education and they wouldn't accept me to go to flight school. I could have enlisted, but I didn't. But later on, I did enlist in World War II in April of '42 in the Signal Corps. And went out to Camp Crowder, Missouri, trained in the Signal Corps, and our unit was ready to deploy overseas. In 1943, we were losing from 600 to 800 to 900 crew members a night in the bombing raids over Europe.
They were mainly B-25s or B?
The air crews were flying B-17s, B-24s, deep raids. The B-25s were the short ones, and of course, when you lose that many air crew, obviously you need to replace them. So they sent a message out through the Army for anyone who would like to trade or transfer from their specific duties to the Army Air Corps and train, why, they had the opportunity. So naturally I volunteered for that, left my signal unit, and went to flight school. But I was kind of late in the process, and I didn't graduate from flight school until February of 1944, which is way back in your time, but I did not get into combat in World War II. I ended up with a B-25 in Salinas, California. They issued me a brand spanking new B-25. It had less than 5 hours on it, and they put a big tank in Bombay and said, "You can head west, young man."
What do you remember about flying the B-25?
Well, I was still primarily in the close air support business. We would strafe, skip bomb, and drop napalm. I think napalm is still my very favorite weapon. Do you know what napalm is?
I do.
What do you think?
Napalm is basically a barrel that when it explodes, it launches this highly acidic acid everywhere.
Well, it's a petroleum product, and it's jelly form, and then you put it in a tank. You got it up there,
Right here.
And,
Good and bad.
and
Well, for the purpose of it,
go ahead.
purpose of it, Vietnam especially, was to clear out the foliage. You could see the bad guys or kill the bad guys. And the good news, it was pretty effective. The bad news, it killed everything, right? I mean,
Yeah.
good and bad.
And it was good against buildings. It was certainly good against personnel. It was good against, if you could skate it in the mouth of a cave, it worked.
You're right. There's a lot of people hiding in caves. You put a big fire in the front door of the cave, it sucks all the oxygen out, they're dead.
So
It's war.
now, Colonel Peoples will be able to tell you more than I can, but I know that the capability that the pilots and the aircrew members have today, that they could program a missile hanging on the wing, tickle it off, and it goes out about 50 miles and down the smokestack. And
A smokestack and 3 or 4 feet accuracy. Yeah.
and naturally, we did about everything from visual contact. And we thought the Norton bomb sight in World War II was a very advanced machine, and it took special training to operate it. The bomber crews over Europe used it. We had one in a B-25, but we didn't use it very much because the mission we were flying was different. I never flew it in combat, but in training missions, we used the bomb sight. But at any rate, it goes back to our very specific point that in your lifetime, you are going to see and participate in many of these advances. I would like to open it up for questions if we could at the moment, if any of you have some thoughts or questions. The imagination, the progress, is kind of hard to imagine what's going to happen to you in your lifetime. But it will be what happens to you, the individual, will be what you make it to a great degree. If you put forth the effort, use your brain, you will be successful. Yes?
Is that all you wanted to do like your whole life? Like go into like...
I'm sorry, my hearing is not as good as it used to be, but say it a little louder.
Is that what you always wanted to be, like fly?
Yes, I guess that's true because my father was a trench warfare man in World War I, and he would tell me stories at night. He would lay in the trenches in World War I and watch the aerial combat that was taking place from the Allies and the German flyers. And of course the machines they were flying weren't supersonic, and they obviously were in aerial combat 500 feet or so, 1,000 feet above his head. And he had a pretty good view of what was going on. And he used to tell me those stories at night, and I knew then that I wanted to fly an airplane. And naturally, I tried to do so. Does that answer your question? Okay. But going on, I was very fortunate to work as a civilian in Ohio at the telephone company, but I stayed in the reserve and the Air National Guard, and we were called up in the Korean fiasco in 1951. And at that time I got to fly a P-51, but they were flying it as close air support airplane, which means we were supporting the ground troops. But I don't know who thought this up, but we were flying out of Pohang, and since the P-51 has an engine in it like your automobile, where the engine is cooled by a liquid, and so it has a radiator to cool the liquid. And one bullet hole in that radiator would, of course, drain the liquid out, and then you had something less than 5 minutes before the engine froze up, and then you were a glider. But so somebody, it had to be a headquarters weenie that thought this up. Well, since the P-51 is vulnerable, maybe we ought to fly these missions at night in the mountains, of course. And the Chinese were pretty much on foot, so they were up on the side of the mountains, and the roads were in the valleys, and so naturally we had trucks and mechanical equipment, and so we were always, our troops that we were supporting were down in the valley near the roads, and the Chinese were all scattered up on the side. And so you could see the whole mountainside would be lit up with what these little firecracker things, which were nothing more than rifle fire. And every once in a while you'd see one go not too far away from the airplane, and somehow that tends to get your attention. But we managed to do okay and got out of there, but flying at night in the mountains for close air support ain't the way you want to do it. Yes?
Did any of your planes you flew ever get shot down?
No, I didn't get shot down.
Get close?
No, I did not receive any enemy fire personally. But yeah, we had some folks in the unit that did.
What about engine problems? You ever have any emergencies that scared you?
Well, one day I was flying an F-84F. We were just deploying back from over Vietnam, and we were coming out of Hawaii. I landed at McClellan, which is over in California, near Sacramento, and sent the squadron on home. And I took off in this 84F jet fighter, and you'll have it up there.
I have it right there.
And it was a nice clear day. I was flying about 40 miles east of Farmington, New Mexico. And all at once, without going into a lot of detail, the engine exploded. And
How many engines did it have?
it had one engine in it.
That's not good when you're in a single engine plane that explodes.
And so naturally, all the temperature gauges went clear up into red, and so I shut the gas off and became a glider, turned around and flew back and landed at Farmington, New Mexico. It was a nice clear day. And again, that's destiny, but it also takes a little skill. And so your decision making has a part to do with it. And yeah, I've had other in-flight emergencies, but with multi-engine airplane, it's not quite so bad. But all of this goes back to the basic point that you're in control. You either do the right thing or you sometimes don't. And that's the way it is.
That was good. That's good. How about telling him about your, he was in the Army Air Corps guys and transitioned to the Air Force in 1947. Tell him about the transition and maybe having different types of bosses that you mentioned before. It's kind of unusual. In 1947, he didn't have any, there's not much diversity in the Air Force. There was no blacks that he worked with daily. Very few females. No Asians. It just didn't happen. It was a different world. So I want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I was working in the Pentagon. You know where the Pentagon is? What it is? Okay, the Department of Defense is headquartered in the Pentagon, and not exactly in Washington, D.C., but just across the river in Arlington, we'll call it Washington. And I was assigned for a special study to the first Air Force one-star general, Jeannie Holmes, who was a female. And I had never reported to a female superior in the Air Force. And so it was a little difficult to make the change. But the only thing I could do was to just be brutally honest. And I told her right to her face that said, I know how to report to a general officer, and I know how to treat a pretty lady. But I'm not real sure I know how to treat a pretty general officer lady. And so you're going to have to make some adjustments as you go along. But just be brutally honest, and that probably will get you farther than trying to be cute about it. Again, goes right back to your own personal effort. I had a couple other.
We have about 6 minutes. Any questions, guys? Any questions around the room, please?
Yes.
How long did it take you to achieve the rank of Brigadier General?
Oh. Well, let's see. I went in the service in 1942, and I was promoted in 1974.
32 years. Well, that's not unusual. I mean,
No.
but he was not active duty the whole time. You were reserve
Right.
at the time. I mean, I'd say 26, 27, 28 years is as quick as you ever get it. So,
But one personal experience. Do you all know who heads up the Department of Defense is the Secretary of Defense? He's a pretty important individual. I don't think we've had a female secretary yet, but he is a pretty important guy. And I was the weekend duty officer one day in the Air Force Inspector General's office. It was a Saturday. The phone rang, and I reported, Colonel Etter talking, and this very gruff but authoritative voice says, "Is this Colonel Etter?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "This is Laird. I want to see what you look like." Well, this fellow named Laird happened to be the Secretary of Defense at that time. Melvin was his first name. Pretty soon, the light colonel came and said, "Come with me," and I trot up to the 5th floor to the secretary's office. He opened up the door, I walked in, shaking, of course, and this guy behind the humongous desk, he looked up over his glasses, and he looked at me for maybe 5 or 8 seconds. He didn't say a word. But for some reason, he wanted to see what I looked like as a result of a study that I had written that happened to go to Congress so that the Congressional Armed Services Committee and Congress directed the Secretary of Defense to make a study on how better to use the reserve forces. And I guess that's why he never said, but I guess that's why he wanted to see me. But believe me, that got my attention.
all right, we have time for about 4 minutes. Any other questions around the room?
Okay. Well, again, it's been my privilege to be here and see all your shining faces. And I don't know how you can do it, but I would sure like to know what you're going to be doing in another 4 years.
All righty, everybody, give a round of applause, please.